Well, we are about 2 minutes past the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining and welcome to our webinar, Acclinate's webinar, on 8 best practices for increasing diversity in clinical trials. My name is Camille Pope, and I am the Chief Medical Lead here at Acclinate. And with me today, I have...
Hi, everyone. I am Shayla Wilson. I am the head of community and digital engagement here at Acclinate. Essentially, I lead all things on our now included community side. And I know we'll touch on this in a little bit, but nice to join you all.
Thanks, Shayla, for that intro. So to tell you all a bit about Acclinate, in case you aren't familiar, what we do is partner with research sponsors like pharmaceutical companies and other healthcare organizations to access and engage communities of color for the purposes of trying to make clinical research more inclusive. And we do this through what we like to call a combination of touch plus tech, where the touch is all of the things that Shayla leads in terms of our community engagement with Now Included, whether it be in-person community engagement or digital community engagement, where we're trying to reach those populations that have been historically underrepresented in research. And then also tech, where we use like our predictive analytics platform, EDIC, to measure our efforts and how well we are doing, so that we're able to continue doing what's working or pivot when we need to rethink our approach. And so we use a combination of these two things in order to reach those who have historically been excluded in clinical research. So as we go through our presentation, please feel free to type any questions or comments in the Q&A section. And at the end, we will try to answer as many of those questions as possible.
And before we dive deeper, I just want to say, normally we would use our headshots, but today we'll have such a focus on community. We wanted to show ourselves in community with some of our Now Included members. And so on the left, you see Camille in DC, and on the right, I'm in Detroit, both two cities that we've activated and enjoy engaging in community activities with them.
Thanks, Shayla. So some of you might have actually been with us about a year ago when we introduced our affective trust framework. And you might be asking yourself, okay, what is affective trust? So affective trust is emotion-based trust. It is trust that is based on really caring about people and genuinely caring about their health and well-being before just going and asking them to do something like participate in a clinical trial, especially if they have been excluded from participation before, or might be skeptical of whether or not you are really trustworthy. And the opposite of affective trust is cognitive trust. And we feel like research sponsors have leaned a bit too much on cognitive trust, which is based on just logic and just rationale, in order to try and engage communities of color, and really haven't been successful. And so we built a whole framework around how to lean into affective trust to better engage communities of color. And so just a quick refresher before we jump into the best practices on the affective trust framework. It consists of 3 pillars, as you can see here from left to right, and then each pillar has like 2 subcomponents. So the first pillar is focused on inclusive study design, and the 2 subcomponents are participant selection and targeted site selection. So really being mindful and thoughtful and intentional about how you as a research sponsor write your study protocol, how you think about eligibility criteria to ensure you're being not so restrictive that you are inadvertently excluding the communities that you're actually trying to reach. And then when it comes to targeted site selection, who are the key opinion leaders that you're engaging? Are you running all of your clinical trials at academic medical centers when the majority of your diverse populations are actually being treated in the community clinics, right? So being really thoughtful about where you are placing clinical trials and how you are writing protocols to engage the communities that you haven't engaged before. The second pillar is around affective community engagement. And so it's just what it sounds like. It means really being in relationship with the populations that you're trying to reach. And doing that through, number 1, activation points, and 2, cultural communications. Activation points are trusted messengers, people in the community who are trusted by the community members who can amplify your message around maybe the disease state or the clinical research that you're trying to do. And then also tailoring your communication so that people who you're trying to reach it's actually relatable and folks can understand the message that you're trying to get across. And an effective community engagement strategy is comprehensive, and it starts before study kickoff and it lasts throughout the duration of the trial and even after the study ends. So that's the second component of affective trust. And then the third component is trust enabling technology. It's 2023, you guys. So, it only makes sense for us to leverage technology to have broader reach. Now, it doesn't take the place, digital engagement doesn't take the place of face-to-face engagement, but it can certainly be used to enhance it. And so we'll talk a bit about how we use a digital and in-person strategies to highlight this pillar within the work that we do. And then the second subcomponent for trust and enabling technology is leveraging AI and ML to better predict who you should be engaging and who might be leaning in more to clinical research or who may just need a bit more time, but more education to help them make a decision. And so I wanted to, again, give a refresher on the effective trust framework because it's really the foundation of these 8 best practices that we're about to go over. If we think about the framework as the foundation and also our real life experiences from working with many of you, research sponsors, as well as being in the community, all those things wrapped up together are what have informed our 8 best practices.
Yeah.
Shayla, have I missed anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important to note that this framework is not a one size fits all, right? So when we talk about effective community engagement, especially when we talk about activation points and cultural communications, we have to tailor this community engagement for each of the communities that we go in. So what community engagement looks like in Detroit may be very different than what it looks like in LA or New York or Birmingham, right? And so being able to be nimble, but also being community driven is important as we think about really making the impact in diversity in clinical trials that we know is important and needed.
Thank you, Shayla. So here are the key learnings we'll be discussing. Take a few seconds to read them. I'm not going to read them out loud because we're going to go through all of them individually. But all in all, these are the 8 key learnings that we've identified that would best help improve clinical trial diversity from our experiences.
And if by chance you haven't had a chance to read them, read the white paper. Someone from our team will put a link in the chat to send you to that white paper to download it and read it in fuller detail. Not during the webinar.
Right, after the webinar. Thanks, Shayla. All right, so let's dive right into the first 2 best practices. And these really go together. Number 1, starting with your end goal, which is a diverse and inclusive clinical trial in mind. And then in doing that, starting very early, like at least 6 to 12 months before study kickoff is when you should be thinking, at least 6 to 12 months before study kickoff, at least should be thinking about your diversity action plan, which we all know is now required by the FDA for all pivotal clinical trials. And so when we are thinking about starting early and what are some of the things that you can do, I'll give an example of how sometimes we've had research sponsors come to us when a trial is almost over. And, there's a few months left and they realize, oh my goodness, we have not enrolled, let's say, enough Black people. And we know that that's going to be a problem when we try to submit that data to the FDA. And the thought is, well, we can come to you guys at Acclinate and can you help us perform a miracle, essentially. And it's when you're in rescue mode that you're not able to have optimal impact. Again, diversity, action planning, and really going into communities and proving yourself to be trustworthy and building trust, it takes time. So while, yes, we might have some success accessing and engaging and raising awareness about that disease state or the clinical research opportunity, it's not the best plan of action to start late like that when a trial is, midway over or almost done, to realize that you need to have a different approach. So it's really important to start early. Something else that we have partnered with research sponsors on is providing input into the diversity action plan, and then also creating a company specific or therapeutic area specific clinical trial diversity playbook, right? So we've come up with a very methodical way to think about what is the FDA requiring, what are the recommendations within that particular therapeutic area around clinical trial diversity, what resources might already be available, and then how can your organization even do like a gap analysis of your teams and determine if you are in the best position to implement your diversity action plan. Maybe you need to engage more medical affairs, more marketing. Maybe you need to, change your list of key opinion leaders and bring some more diverse backgrounds and perspectives onto the advisory boards that you're using to create your study protocols. Maybe you need to partner with some outside organizations for your community engagement activities that you want to execute. So there's a whole organizational gap analysis that you can do to figure out what your gaps are, and then apply recommendations so that you are best positioning yourself to achieve, clinical trial diversity when the study kicks off, and then be open to pivoting as you move through the trial if you realize certain approaches aren't working. And I will put out a shameless plug here. We're actually going to be talking more about that method that we've come up with at the DIA conference in a few weeks. We'll be presenting a poster where we talk about how you can think about using the effective trust framework as a foundation for creating this type of playbook. So if you're going to be at DIA in a couple of weeks, come check us out, because we'd love to be able to share more about our experiences in doing that with different research sponsors. Okay. Best practice number 3. This is a good one. Clearly define minority, underserved, underrepresented, and other community-oriented language in your study protocol. And Shayla and I can tell you, we could have a whole separate discourse on whether or not these are even the proper terms socially to be describing those who've been historically excluded from clinical trials, but that is another conversation for another webinar. But the point we're trying to make here is that you really need to be clear and consistent about the populations that you're trying to reach, and everyone who is touching that study needs to be clear and consistent and understand that as well. A great example here, we were working with one research sponsor who had a clinical trial with several cohorts, and one of the cohorts was specifically for minority patients. And the way the CRO, who was the partner for this clinical trial, understood the definition of minority was prioritize Black patients for that cohort first. However, there was an investigator that we were partnering with because we wanted to understand his community around his clinical trial site, who felt that, who believed that the definition of minority wasn't just to prioritize Black patients first, but, anyone who represents an underrepresented population like Latino, Latina, Native American should be placed into that cohort. And so when he had identified a Latina patient who he thought should go into that minority cohort, like his site staff and the CRO actually got into it a little bit because they couldn't agree on what the definition of minority really should be and who should be prioritized for that cohort. And so when we took that information, that insight back to the research sponsor, and we sat down with the research sponsor and looked at the study protocol, we realized that minority was defined differently in like 5 different sections of the protocol. Section 1, it was about prioritizing Black patients. But later on in the protocol, it mentioned it wasn't clear about who should be prioritized. Is it Black patients? Is it Latino and Latina patients? And so that was really causing confusion. And it ended up in a patient who probably could have gone in the minority cohort being placed in another cohort, and it didn't really add towards their diversity goal for the study. So it's really important that you align as a team and align with your investigators and community partners and CROs on what you're trying to achieve and who you're trying to reach in your studies. And then point 4 is around race and ethnicity playing different roles in the US versus globally. And this is something that we don't have a full solution for, but we know that it's a challenge, and we really want companies to be mindful and be open to being nimble when trying to address their diversity targets and their approaches in the US versus other countries. We know that in the US that, race and ethnicity is described differently than, say, in France or Germany. Somebody in France who we may view as Black might not view themselves as Black. So how do they self-identify? And that can be challenging to approach, but it's just important for companies to think about how to be nuanced when you're working with different countries. And again, really just understanding the communities that you're in and what that self-identification process looks like. And you might not be able to use the same language in your systems and in all your informed consent forms across all the different countries. And, if you can find a way to be more nuanced and be specific, then that would be helpful. Anything to add there, Shayla?
No, but you take us to the next point of understanding the community that you're in, right? So what Camille has said so far is being clear in your intentions and being thoughtful about how you define the participants that you are seeking to have in your study. And so also being very clear about how your study fits into the needs of the community and what implication the needs of the community has on your trial recruitment overall. And so one of the things that we recently did was activate community in Detroit. A couple of months ago, we had some vaccine awareness campaigns that we were running just to better understand vaccine perceptions across the city, as well as understanding if residents would be willing to participate in clinical trial opportunities related to vaccines. And so, of course, we build culturally tailored assets based off of our effective framework that we disperse throughout the community. But being boots on the ground, we also got to talk to several key community leaders as well as just regular folks about what it is that they were most interested in seeing in the health and wellness of the city. And I wanted to share this video from Pastor Q as one of our community activation points in Detroit. I think it's important, some of the things that he's saying around being nimble and listening to the community. And so I will share that now.
When I became a pastor, I didn't know that I was going to need to be a public health expert. Paul says this thing like we're called to be all things to all people, which means that ministry has to be versatile to meet people where they are. And a lot of these things were far beyond my own comprehension. And so really being a student with my congregants, learning alongside them. Once I became confident in my understanding of it, then I became an advocate to, again, assuage a lot of the nervousness that some of my members shared. My name is Quantez Presley, and I'm just enthusiastic to say that I am now included.
So I think what he said there about being essentially feeling what his congregants felt, being a student too, is important, especially when we think about building sustained engagement in communities. Pastor Q was able to get about 90% of his congregation vaccinated for COVID with some help of partners and resources that have been tailored for his congregation. But the way that he did that was by taking a back seat and letting his congregation have a seat at the table. And so when we talk about increasing diversity in clinical trials, that is exactly what we need to do, making sure that the community has a seat at the table, or that we're building tables for the community, and everything that we do is community driven. So I mentioned how we went into Detroit to focus on vaccine awareness campaigns, but as we sought to understand the community more, we started to ask them questions. What are health topics that are of interest to you? How would you be willing, or would you be willing to participate in clinical research? Do you even know what clinical research is? And what we started to see is that vaccines weren't an interest at all. And I know depending on what kind of screen you have, you may not be able to see all the words in this word map, but I think what's important here is that the themes that started to emerge from us asking community members what it is that was important to them were around diabetes, mental health, high blood pressure / hypertension. Those are health topics that continue to come up. And because we were able to go in, just understand the community, listen to them, really, really have a seat at the table with them, now we're able to build culturally sensitive, sustained engagement around the topics that impact the community the most. And that's important when we talk about increasing diversity in clinical trials. Next, number 6 is investing in community. And so, of course, giving people seats at tables is one way of investing, but truly investing in community also means supplying people with the time, the resources, and all money, all the things that's needed to create more inclusive solutions. And so often when we talk about community engagement, people will say, oh, I just threw money. We partner with this church, right? So that essentially just means they gave the church resources of some shape, form, or fashion and expected people to participate in the clinical trial. That is more transactional, and that is not what we are looking to do here at Acclinate when we think about building intergenerational health. And so when we think about intergenerational health, we also think about who are the people that are making the decisions for your family, right? We know that our kids will participate in sports and they have to get physicals. And so that means we have to go to the doctor at least once a year, especially for the children to be healthy and to participate in these sporting events. We know that sometimes we have a teenager who's like, I don't want to eat that, but I want to eat this. And so when we go grocery shopping, we're thinking about who will eat the food that we're putting in our house. And so being able to supply the next generation with the right tools and resources to understand what clinical research is and to really understand what all goes into creating healthier communities is important. So I just want to share another video from one of our community events in Birmingham.
What you see going on now with this company that we partnered with for our second year, which is Acclinate, now included and be included. It's a digital healthcare platform that's been created in the Jefferson County area for our community. Everything that you want is in front of you, right? Anything that you want to attain, anything that you want to do in this life is in front of you, all right? It's in the palm of your hands. Anything that you want to do, goals that you set for yourself, you have to set them for yourself, right? And once you set them for yourself, you have to move your feet and do the work in order to attain.
So we want to make sure we get you as much health information, and the health information we get you is designed for you. You don't have to go Google all over the place. You can go to Be Included, you can go to Now Included, and you'll find information, health information, jobs, all types of things that's specifically related to what you may want to do and for you. So this is why I do what I do, community engagement and building healthy communities. Like, how many of you heard about clinical research? How many? Hold your hands up. How many? Anybody heard? Anybody participating in a clinical trial? People take all type of medicines, right? Everything that was determined about that medicine that you take, it may not even be related to you, because what the textbook, medical book said, we didn't have enough people of color participating. So it may not even work for you. You can allow bad research to keep you from having these babies, from having a healthy future generation. But you all, we got to participate. We have got to get involved and know that these medicines work for us. So that's why we want to get you all the information you need so that you can make an intelligent decision about your own health.
So as you can see, it's important that we not only educate those people that might qualify for your study, so 18 and up, or 23 and above, whatever your criteria is, it's important to educate the people in the household. So really making sure that everyone within these communities understand what clinical research is and why it's important for them to participate and be included. All right. Sorry. And so of course we know this all sounds good, it feels good, but like, what does it actually mean at the end of the day? And so as mentioned in the video, this was a little league football team in Birmingham, Alabama. As part of our Birmingham activation, we have our Be Included platform that essentially focuses on delivering resources and educational materials for residents of Birmingham through our Now Included platform. And so with this particular event, we were able to engage over 250 people, children, adults, and teach them more about what clinical research is and why it's important. We also, for us, when we talk about investing in community, we like to invest dollars. And so for this particular event, we spent over $7,500 just in local businesses specific to Birmingham. And so for us, it's important if we're talking about health and wealth and building up communities and sustaining engagement, it's important that we also continue to invest money and resources in those communities. And then when we looked at the actual resources, looking at the platform and how people were engaging, what we saw in the week after this particular event is that there was a almost 500% increase in traffic to the website. And so when we go into these communities, when we show our passion, when we are actually true to how we are investing in them, we often see a good return on investment, in that people are more interested and more intrigued in understanding how they can participate in clinical trials to improve their health.
That was great, Shayla. Thank you. I love watching our videos. I know we have a question in the Q&A. If someone asked if we could give access to the videos, they are on our YouTube channel. So, Shayla or someone from our team will answer your question and pop that link in there, and you can check out all of our community videos. They're really great.
Yes, subscribe to our YouTube and Now Included.
So best practice number 7. Invest in trust enabling technology. And as we mentioned before, while trust enabling technology can certainly help you have a broader reach and a further reach, it should not come at the expense of in-community engagement. So a great mix of both is really what you need. And it helps to build deeper connections and relationships with community members, because there may be people who, you see in person one time, but you can consistently follow up with them through various digital means to ask additional questions. And again, just build your relationship through, a digital platform or telephone calls or things of that nature. So it's about using the technology to facilitate and build trust and combining that with in-person engagement. And trust enabling technology can be used to actually measure your impact and measure your success. So, we use like UTM, I think that's what they're called, UTM tracking codes. You can see I'm not the tech guru, but we have an amazing tech team that partners with our community and medical team to make sure that we're tracking everything, right? So, if we're sending out flyers to folks in a particular zip code, because we've had an investigator tell us that community around his clinical trial site really has a diverse patient population, and they want to raise awareness about the clinical trial and the people with the folks living in that zip code. Well, we'll be able to track how many people are actually receiving that information or scanning the QR code and then going to our website. And if things aren't looking like the numbers aren't looking the way we would expect them to, we then take an opportunity to pivot, right? And we take an opportunity to shift and do something different. We might reach out to people in that community and get a better understanding of what it is that's going to be more appealing to them. And we also, again, measure engagement through our edict platform, that helps us to determine, like, how do we better engage folks and be a bit more targeted where it makes sense, and where to lean in and where to fall back. And so that's really what trust enabling technology should do. It should supplement your in-person engagement and help you facilitate deeper connections with folks, and also help you measure your impact.
Yeah. It should also help you to sustain that engagement. And so I think it's important to note that when you use technology, it's not necessarily a crutch, but it is more of a cherry on the top of a sundae, right? So using technology helps you to nurture the relationships that you might not be able to build if you may not have the resources on your team, or if you're trying to reach geographies that may not be that you may not have a large presence in. And so just how this plays out in the community, I wanted to highlight one of our more recent activations, our Mommy Listening Tour. And this started, we initially started this engagement online, right? So we announced the listening tour. We did some digital engagement to try to collect stories and interests in people who would be willing to talk about their maternal health care and experiences. And then we took the show on the road. So we've already done 2 stops. We had a booth at DC's Momfrance, which was sponsored by District Motherhood. And then we recently did a expo in Huntsville with Baby Palooza. And at both of these in-person activations, we were not only able to gather stories on video, but we also had individuals who wrote stories or inspirational quotes or advice to moms. And so really being able to use in-person events to bridge the gap to nurturing relationships and sustain community engagement. The other thing is, while we are in person, we ask those same questions, right? Like, would you be willing to participate in clinical research opportunity if presented? Do you know what clinical research is? All of those questions. What are you most interested in? Who do you trust for health information? And just of note, recently at our DC stop, we had a mom who went into the booth and she specifically said, I would not participate in a clinical research study while I was pregnant. For her, she felt like that time was so critical for her and her baby that she didn't want to introduce any new drugs or anything that could potentially harm her or the baby. She did say that she had been offered an opportunity to participate in clinical research during her last pregnancy. And as a gift for participating in the clinical trial, the team offered her a $25 gift card. And for her, that was kind of like a slap in the face. Like there's not enough money in the world that would put me in a position that I felt I couldn't provide for my child, or it essentially wasn't sufficient enough. And so as she talked through that experience, there was another mom waiting after her to share her experience. And that mom in particular said that she absolutely would participate in clinical research, and that if she had been offered an opportunity, she would, because she knows how important it is for people like her to participate. And the mom that had just come out of the booth heard her response, and outside of the booth, they started talking about why they would or would not. And it's important to note that, like, for us, technology is following up with those moms and seeing how their willingness to participate transpires over time. So through our edict platform and our predictive analytics, we're able to see, okay, after this event or after this many touch points, this is what transpired with moms who may or may not have been willing to participate in clinical research. And we're able to do that in a way that will then present people with clinical research opportunities at the very moment that they're open to it and willing to participate.
Thank you, Shayla. And so our last best practice, pretty simple: invest in diversity. Invest means like invest. It's money, yes. It's time. It's resources. It's going into communities consistently, sustainably, either in person or through, as we said, digital means, and showing that you care. You care about people's health and well-being, and you want to provide resources to help them make informed health decisions, and you don't just want something. One of our team members posted on LinkedIn last week this quote that you see on the right: community engagement doesn't stop for us on Friday. And that's because last weekend I always say we were in the streets. Like, we were in all these different cities at the same time. Shayla was in Detroit. I was in DC. There was the Baby Palooza in Huntsville. community engagement and reaching out and building trust is something that is it's a nonstop effort. And so that is something that we really try to impress upon the research sponsors that we work with, is that the investment it's time and resources, and it's ongoing. It's not just plopping yourself into a predominantly Black neighborhood and saying, oh, we put a clinical trial here and all the people are going to open their doors, run out, and try to participate. That's not what's going to work. There are so many levels of just mistrust and bias and other things that play a role that you have to work to overcome in order to prove yourself trustworthy and for people to want to be involved. And so that takes investment over time, and it can take money and resources, and it's not just 9 to 5. The last thing I'll say about investing in diversity is thinking about your own organization. Who's at the table? Who is at the decision-making table? Do you have people who all look the same and have the same, majority experiences? Or are you bringing different perspectives from people who have the lived experience of the populations that you're trying to reach who actually work at your organization? So who is writing your study protocol? Do you have, Black scientists who are reviewing those eligibility criteria? Who's on your medical affairs team? Who's on your marketing team? All of those things are important. Workforce diversity is so important because people bring perspectives that can help you better navigate the decisions that you're trying to make when approaching communities, but also even just how you write a study protocol so that it is more inclusive than it is exclusive.
Yeah, and just to double back on this workforce diversity, as Camille mentioned, I was in Detroit this past weekend collecting a story of a lymphoma survivor a 2-time lymphoma survivor within our community. And interestingly enough, this was the same videographer and photographer couple that we worked with a couple months back when we first activated Detroit through our community engagement event then. And the photographer mentioned having issues with fibroids, and a couple months ago she followed up right after and said, hey, are you all involved in any fibroids opportunities? I think I'm ready to do some research because they've been killing me and I just want some answers. And at the time we weren't. And so what I ended up doing is sending her some resources because, once again, sustained community engagement goes beyond the transactional approach of here's the study, participate in it. And so sharing some resources with her from some of our partners in Detroit, she was able to find a study that fit her needs and schedule. And so she qualified for the study. She received a message after completing the pre-screener that she would be receiving a phone call within 48 hours. She didn't receive that call until 3 months later. When she did get the call, so not only has she changed her mind, because in the beginning she wasn't even completely sure about research, but having spent 2 days with us collecting stories and hearing different perspectives across the city, she felt inspired. But then when she got on the call, she said that the lady, had she even sounded like her or as if she was interested in her story, that she probably would not have changed her mind, but she felt that she was just another number. And so when we talk about diversity, we also mean just training your workforce to make sure that they are being as inclusive as possible, because that's the only way that we're going to reach more inclusive research solutions.
All right. Well, that's it for the formal presentation. We are really thankful that you joined us. We have some questions in the chat, so let's see if we can address a couple of those. Does Acclinate track metrics on the participants that end up screening for trials following your community campaigns? So Shayla, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so we definitely ask our community members once we know individuals have screened or have been enrolled, we follow up with them just to see what happened. And so, and of course, we only we will only know what they self-report. So as a reminder, we are not a clinical patient recruitment company. So we can never say like, oh, 10 people have completed this study and all of that. But what we do is make sure that we're sustaining that engagement. And so definitely keeping track of those participants who screened, and as well as wanting to hear their experiences. Like for us, it's important to hear those unique insights into how participants have screened or gone through trials and what their experiences have been.
Thanks, Shayla. And Shayla gave the perspective from our community side. Something else that we do is when we're partnering with research sponsors, you know, as we said, we're not a recruitment organization. So we often get patients to the point of pre-screening, and we're able to, you know, assess them going through a pre-screener. And if they pass the pre-screener, connect them to a clinical trial site, however that might be, whether it's to a call center or it's directing them to a specific address. But then after that, in addition to our community team following up, we also are following up with the research sponsor or having a relationship with the investigator, and they can let us know, you know, maybe not specifically for the, you know, specific patients, right? Because there's personal health information involved in all those things, but like in general, how many people who came through our pre-screener ended up actually screening for the clinical trial. So giving us that number and saying, or how many people screen failed and what were some of the statistics around that. So we actually lean on our collaboration with the research sponsor and our relationship with the clinical trial sites to help us, you know, have a view of how many people came through our process and actually made it all the way through, and how many people maybe did not. And we also, through relationships with the investigators, get qualitative insights that help to inform whether some of the reasons why people might screen fail, right? And so we gave an example, you know, previously about the investigator who gave us the insight about the, you know, not understanding what cohort the patient should go in for the minority cohort. Well, those are the types of insights that we can also that we gather through our relationship with the insight our relationship with the sites and the research sponsors. So that helps us understand like who is screening and who is not as well from our efforts. The next question. Do you also use trust enabling technology to track and address community questions around why minorities should now be more trusting of clinical researchers when they reference past historical events? Or do you reserve these questions and conversations for in-person engagements? Go ahead, Shayla.
What a lovely question. So I will say that we never tell any community member to trust or not trust anything. What we do is access and engage. So we empower and educate you to make the decisions for yourselves. The one thing I love about Pastor Q's interview is that he made it very clear. I am not here to tell you what decision to make. I am here to give you the resources to help you make more informed decisions. I also believe for so long, historically, communities of color have been told that they should do this or that, right? Eat right, exercise well, do this, you'll be great, all of these things. And what works for one person may not work for another. So we do not have conversations saying trust clinical researchers. We also don't reference historical events because what we know to be true is that historical events are happening every day. I just had a baby, not just, she's about a year and a half ago. I was in the hospital myself dealing with my own health issues, and I was treated as if I had no idea what was going on in my body, or as if I was exaggerating things. And so when we talk about historical events, those are very much present in today's society. What we do in our community is have those conversations. We connect people through shared experiences, making sure that people do feel comfortable having open and honest conversations about their experiences, whether it's with research or not, similar to what I referenced at the Momference, right? We had one woman who said, I would absolutely not do that. $25 isn't enough for you to put anything in my body that could jeopardize me or my child. And then a woman right behind her that said, I absolutely would. I trust the science. I believe my my doctors. And so we tend to have these conversations happen organically versus telling people what they should or should not believe. Camille, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. That was good, Shayla. We have one more question. After the initial events, does your organization conduct follow-up events or touch points with community organizations? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so for us, it's about building relationships and partnerships. We, once again, stress the sustained engagement piece. In order to sustain, you have to build those relationships, come back, invest in the community, things like that. It could look like a number of different things, right? So we help to sponsor the sneaker ball, for instance, through our Birmingham activated platform Be Included, but then we continue to work with those coaches on different resources that they might need throughout the year. So if it's, hey, we need team jerseys or we need t-shirts for X, we help do things like that. And then we do more formal events like health fairs at community-led events. So for instance, in July, we have an event that we're sponsoring with our lymphoma survivor and the lymphoma survivor that I mentioned earlier. He's putting on a celebrity basketball game in Detroit. We'll table the event, we'll share resources about Now Included. We also will bring partners into the fold. So partners who may have access to do screenings on site or who may just be able to provide significantly more resources in the community, like genetic testing or things like that. And so we see ourselves as relationship builders and connectors for organizations to continue those after touch points.
Thank you, Shayla. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A section. So thank you all for joining us. If you have additional questions, you see our contact information here on the screen. Yes, this webinar will be available. The recording is going to be available, and someone from our team will make sure that everyone who has signed up for the webinar definitely receives the recording. And we thank you. We hope that we were able to shed some light on what our experiences have been like partnering with research sponsors, engaging with our communities, and also mapping that back to the effective trust framework to give you some ideas and insights on how you can adjust your approach to better reach communities and make sure your research is inclusive. So thank you very much and see you next time.
Thank you all. And we put the link to the white paper again in the chat, just for those who may have missed it earlier. Feel free to have a look, send us questions if you have anything to follow up on. And thank you all for attending.
You're welcome. Bye.